Hello, and welcome to another episode of Builder Spotlight, a monthly interview with luthiers from all over, found exclusively at Acoustic.Coffee. In this episode, I'm delighted to be talking with Greg Maxwell, founder of Dogwood Guitars in Mount Vernon, Ohio. So grab a cup of your favorite coffee, and we'll spend a little time with Greg, hearing about his journey in lutherie and getting his perspectives on building acoustic guitars. Hey, Greg.
Hey, Rich.
How you doing? Welcome to Builder Spotlight. How's that?
That's better.
Okay. Excellent. By the way, I meant to tell you last time we spoke, you need to sprinkle some sawdust around in your shop a little bit. You know, take the chisels, make the chisels a little crooked. You know, put something out of place. The Zen in you is clearly evident.
I had a customer here over the weekend to pick up a guitar I built for him, and he said I should make a video of me walking into the shop some morning and going, somebody's been in here, and one of the chisels would have the label turned sideways.
Exactly. No, that says a lot. That says a tremendous amount. Well, listen, thank you very much for taking a couple minutes and joining us. We've been getting a lot of great feedback about the interviews. People are learning a lot. They're just a lot of fun. And I have my cup of Sumatra here all hot and ready to go. So we're just going to have a nice, relaxed conversation. Nice. Very nice. So generally where I like to start, Greg, is just kind of walking us through how you began your journey. I know that your background takes you in a lot of different really cool areas. And if you would just take a minute and share with us how you got started in lutherie and guitar building and what aspects of the other experiences that you had contributed to where you find yourself today.
Sure. Well, like a lot of guitar builders, I had an extensive background in woodworking before. I started off in the early 80s working as a trim carpenter in Muirfield Village, which is where Jack Nicklaus hosts his annual Memorial Golf Tournament.
Okay.
So very expensive houses. We hand fit all the miter joints for the door and window casings with block planes. And that's where I really cut my teeth on woodworking. And after 2 or 3 years of doing that, I decided I wanted to build furniture. And I was never interested in building, bread boxes. And I dove right into, Queen Anne highboys and all that kind of stuff. I've always sort of been a glutton for punishment when it comes to pushing myself. And I did that for a number of years and was very rewarding, but not very well paying. And I have been interested in reptiles as a hobby ever since I was a very small child. No explanation for that. Everybody in my family hates snakes. But when I was, even before kindergarten, I had my mom cut paper snakes out for me and I carried them around in a shoebox. I joke that I single-handedly lowered the property values in my neighborhood as a small child. But out of that hobby grew a business mass producing reptile enclosures, incubators. We did stuff for private collectors, zoos, pet stores. And from that business, I learned the art of tooling up and mass production and managing cash flow and dealing with a large number of customers. And I sold that business and used a lot of the money I had made from it to get started as a hobby breeder with a species of python called a green tree python. And a lot of people know my name from my years as a green tree python breeder. I wrote a couple of books and did a lot of talks and a lot of things to promote the keeping and breeding of green tree pythons.
I think I actually have one crawling around here somewhere.
And so to come full circle, I had a guy on the East Coast approach me about buying my python business after I'd been doing that for about 13 years. And I thought, what am I going to do now? So it always gravitated in the back of my mind to someday maybe building guitars. And I investigated schools and found one I liked, went to school. And when I got out, I hung out my shingle and pretty much been at it full time for about a dozen years now.
Do snakes crawl? Or is there another term for that? Do they slither? What's the term for
Yeah, they crawl, they climb. Yeah, it pretty much.
So crawling is the correct way of saying, okay, I
Yeah,
didn't want to
yeah.
misspeak. So in all of that influence, has there been mother of pearl decorative inlays of snake heads and snake motifs in your guitar builds, or?
That was really a surprising thing to me. I was very well known in the reptile industry for my work with both the cages and the pythons, and I thought for sure that somebody, a musician that was into snakes, would commission me to do some kind of a snake motif inlay guitar, and it's never happened, and I've never done one just on my own. So
Hasn't
no.
happened. Okay, well, there's still time.
Sure.
And then the furniture, you jumped right into the big stuff with the high boys, claw and ball feet carvings.
Yeah, I did that kind of stuff. I did a commission for a cathedral restoration in a city in Ohio, and they were sandblasting and restoring the outside of this very old Gothic Catholic church building. And so I got commissioned to do all the interior woodwork. And so I had built them a big oak altar with carved pillars for legs and all kind of cool stuff. The old joke, well, how do you carve an elephant out of a bar of soap? Well, you just cut off everything that doesn't look like an elephant.
Fun stuff. I've heard that analogy used a lot with guitar building as well. Carve away everything that's not a guitar.
Right.
So it's knowing which parts are supposed to be left behind that is always the fun and challenging, at least for me.
Exactly.
So building, are you currently making multiple different types of guitars, arch tops, flat tops, mandolins, banjos, or do you have a particular favorite or specialty?
Pretty much keyed in on building steel string flat tops. Of course, we know they're not really flat, but that's what they're called. But I don't do arch tops or pretty much anything else. I've had some requests over the years for that, classical. And I've always felt like what I would prefer to do is to specialize and get as good as I could get at that one thing rather than trying to diversify over a wide range of instruments.
Okay.
But I also run a very active repair business, so I don't build full time. I work them both together, and it doesn't, allow me a great deal of time for experimentation. So I built 3 models of guitars: a true 17-inch jumbo, a guitar I call the Monarch because the guy that designed the guitar where I went to school, that's what he called it. And I thought it was respectful not to change the name and just make it my own. So I left the name as he had named it. And it's a 15.5-inch belt, sort of a hybrid between an OM and a dread. It's a little more graceful and small than a dread, but not quite as small as an OM. And then I have a guitar that I more or less designed from scratch based on the grand auditorium shape. That's my version of a finger style guitar. So
Okay.
Those are the 3 that I do.
Okay, that's excellent. Thank you for sharing that. And in terms of the shapes, you described them very nicely. Do you change up the volume of the body at all, like to narrower sides or larger sides, depending on what your the player or the client wants?
Well, the Monarch and my jumbo, which I dubbed the Kingston, which is a throwback to one of my favorite folk groups, the Kingston Trio. And I wanted to sort of stick with the royalty theme, after starting off with the Monarch. So those 2 guitars are pretty much, designed by other people. The jumbo I based roughly on the Guild JF 100, which is the jumbo body guild that John Denver used to play. And I learned to play guitar off of John Denver records in the 1970s. So I've always had a love for the guilds and for jumbos in particular. The Eminence guitar, which is my finger style guitar, I put some design elements into the shape and size of that I thought would enhance the tone I was going after, which was a little more articulation in the treble end, a little less bass response than you would get in a dread, for example. And so I made the waist a little bit narrower, and I made the depth of the box a little bit less. And because I put so much work into tuning the tops of my guitars to a target resonance and a target deflection, really all three sound very similar, the same balance, same clarity. There's not a huge difference in the voice of the three guitars. That said, I can adjust the tone of the guitar for the player by the top that I choose for the guitar. I wouldn't build a bluegrass style guitar out of the same top that I would choose for a dedicated finger style player, for example.
Okay, so that really simplifies things then. So there's generally a selection in terms of the style of guitar, and then you fine tune it with the materials and the sound that they're looking for.
Right. The client really has a lot of say in the aesthetic elements of the guitar, rosette design, inlays, that kind of stuff. And so I don't deviate from that too much. But like I said, I can tailor the sound for a person who needs a little bit more articulation or a little more headroom, that kind of stuff.
And I'm sure that with the aesthetic choices in terms of woods, backs and sides, neck materials, et cetera, there's still a lot of opportunity for their input and their
Sure. And that's what most people want to have input in. Yeah.
So Greg, in this process of, working with your hands, the woodworking from a construction, furniture making into the guitar building, is there an aspect of the building, the guitar making, that you enjoy more than others? And the follow-up question to that is there an aspect that you really, don't look forward to when you got to go into the shop and attack that part of it?
Sure. I've always really enjoyed the artistic aspects. So designing and building the rosette is always one of my favorite parts of the guitar. Unlike a lot of people, I enjoy cutting and inlaying shell. So that's always a fun day or two for me when I'm doing, that part of it. The thing I probably could walk away and never do again the rest of my life and just be perfectly happy is wet sanding a gloss lacquer finish.
Well, it needs to be leveled. So yeah, there's
you have to do it, right?
it's part of the process. Is there an aspect that you find continually challenging?
Not really. I have my process really worked out. And as you probably know, and a lot of the people watching these know, there's essentially two schools of approach for voicing and tuning for the people that approach it purposefully. And there are some people that don't, and that's fine. But for those that really approach it purposely, there's what I call the tactile approach, or you might the slang term might be the touchy-feely approach, flexing tops, tapping and listening. And then there's the data-driven approach where we use applied physics with actual data, numbers, deflection numbers, measuring resonances. And I find for my personality and my approach to it, the data-driven approach works best for me. And so it's far from boring. I mean, every guitar is unique and there's challenges to every piece of wood to bring out the best in it. But the basic approach with target resonances and target deflections is pretty straightforward. I thickness my tops individually based on their individual strength, which we, determine by measuring the modulus, Young's modulus, which is the amount of resistance to flex in the top based on a known weight. And so I don't ever guess, or I don't flex or tap. I know I have a whole stack of tops over in the bin that I've put through the material properties measuring process that I use, and I know what the final thickness on every one of those tops is going to be based on their modulus. And then when I'm carving braces, I do so with the top glued to the sides, but before I close the box, and I'm tapping and using software to watch and listen to the top resonance change as I carve braces, and I have a target resonance that I'm going for, which directly correlates to how stiff the top is. and what pitch it's going to vibrate at ultimately in the completed guitar. And so I'm going through that same process on every guitar. Again, it might be adjusted a little bit to the player's style and preference, but the process is the same. So for me, that's not really the biggest challenge in building the guitar. The biggest challenge for me is, to build a perfect guitar aesthetically. And anybody that's ever built one knows that, there's a long learning curve to that. And it seems like every guitar that I build, something goes wrong that never went wrong ever before. So I have a quote that I can see from my bench here. It's hidden underneath the table saw that I use out in front of me for fretting or for slotting fretboards. And it's a quote that was supposedly attributed to Grit Laskin, the famous inlay artist. But it was spoken by Michael Greenfield in an interview I saw with him, and it said the mark of a truly great luthier is his ability to hide his mistakes. And so I have that down there where no customer will ever see it, but I can see it from my bench. And when I mess up something, I try not to allow it to destroy my day or, to beat myself up too hard over it. Say, this is just another challenge and another opportunity to learn how to prevent something the next time and fix it this time.
I think there's a lot of similar thoughts there, Greg. You're looking to restore something so that it's not noticeable anymore. So
right.
I think there's great builders that have come up through the ranks that have started in the repair shop and learned those skills wonderfully.
Many of the well-known builders all started as repair guys. Yeah.
But the ability to hide the mistakes, it reminds me of a podcast I listened to Michael Bashkin doing, and I can't remember who the person was that he was speaking to, but I was in the shop here laughing because the comment was something like, I never run out of ways to F things up. So it seems like every time you're doing something to the comment you just made, there's always something that's going to happen, or something happens that has never happened before. You think, oh my gosh, I never would have anticipated that. And to me, that's part of the whole gestalt of what we're doing, right? Like all the varieties of skills that are required. One of them is trying to anticipate or repair or fix something that you didn't think you were going to run into. So right. It keeps us on our toes. So that's how you've identified as what I guess you're saying is the most challenging part, is the not knowing what's coming around the corner next.
Sure. And I mean, it's not like you walk in every morning and go, what disaster awaits me today? But there's always the element of surprise lurking around the corner that if you let your guard down or you're not careful, or you get in a little bit of a hurry, it's always there to bite you. So yeah. That's the biggest challenge for me, is to get to the end of the process and hand the customer a flawless guitar.
Certainly to commoditize it. You're absolutely right. In fact, that brings me to a related question. When we're talking about commoditizing this, have you ever run into a situation, Greg, where you're doing the commissioned work, and even with all of that science and training, it's just not meeting your expectations and you don't deliver it? Has that ever happened?
That's, knock on wood, no pun intended, but that's never come close for me. I've had things I've had to redo. I was just working on a rather complicated rosette over the weekend, and one of the little thin areas of wood between two of the rings blew out as I was routing it out. And I pretty much had to talk myself, do not try to fix this. It's not going to look right. Start over. And that's what I had to do. So I have stuff like that, but I've never gotten to anywhere near the completed product and go, this just isn't going to work. Fortunately, they always come out.
So you're, if I'm following you correctly, then that top went into the bin. You got two new pieces of spruce out and started again.
Yeah, that top went into the patch and repair spruce pile. Yeah. And I started over with a new set. Fortunately, I had a nearly identical set with nearly identical material properties. So it's going to build the same guitar.
Yeah. Well, especially when you apply the science like you were talking about. So,
right.
So I want to shift gears slightly here. I know that part of your passion in this craft is also as a teacher. So if you could summarize or try to just talk to us a little bit about, is there a different mentality or different approach from a teacher as opposed to a builder, the luthier instructor versus the luthier professional? Can you kind of walk me through how your mind walks into the shop with those different responsibilities?
Sure. Well, if I understand your question correctly, I think the biggest difference, you can be an amazing craftsman and not be a very good teacher. And I think my ability as a teacher really keys on my sense of breaking things down and explaining it as though you'd never heard it before. And so when I come into the shop to build, I don't have to worry about explaining it to anybody. I'm right there. I've got my tools and my wood, and hopefully I can get into that that zone and just things flow. But when I have a student, I have to remind myself I'm not talking down to the student to be very, very basic. I'm helping them to understand, because I'm not assuming that they already know 25% or 50% or 75% of what I'm already going to cover. And, of course, every once in a while, you'll have somebody that'll say, oh, yeah, I'm already familiar with that. And then you can move on to a different subject and leave that one, more or less where it's at, because they're already there. But I think that's the biggest mentality that we have to have as teachers, is not assuming that people already know stuff, and being able to speak to them on their level and break it down to them on their level.
Yeah. The internet as a resource is full of information, and it's a continuum of great information to not so great information. How have you seen that influence your students?
Sure. I find that there's two basic things that I have to deal with. The first is more common, and that is people that have learned to build a guitar from about 6 or 7 different sources. And with Lutherie, there's multiple ways to do everything. But typically you're going to have a basic system of how you do it from start to finish. And I have students that I do a 2-week build class. And if they've studied at 3 or 4 different places, and one guy's taught them how to voice a top, and another guy's taught them how to prepare for the finish, and another guy's taught them how to set the neck, they really have a lot of confusion, because some of the methods don't play well together. It doesn't mean they're not each valid on their own, but I think having an integrated approach is better. So I always try to encourage people, pick somebody that you have an easy time learning from, and you relate to their personality, and you like their work and their finished product, and then try to gain a degree of competence with their method before you start to deviate and experiment with other methods. I'm
sorry.
I sort of had the attitude when I graduated from my school, well, the way I was taught is the only way to do it, or it's, by far the best way. And I found out when I got out there, for a couple of years, there's a lot of different ways to do things. And now I actually do things in certain ways on some elements of a build that I think are better than the way I learned at school. But that's the first thing that I run across, is people that have like the vegetable soup approach to doing things, and it can be confusing. And then there's the other problem, is people that have actually just been taught something wrong, or they were taught by somebody whose craftsmanship is maybe a little on the coarse side by my standards. I have people that bring me a guitar. Well, I built this guitar, at such and such a class, and will you evaluate it while I'm at your shop? And I always tell them, sure. And I'll be kind, but I'm also going to be honest. So if you really want me to do it, I will, but I'm going to give you my honest evaluation. And my gosh, there's gaps in the binding, and there's blowout around the rosette, and just not really very refined work. And so that can be a challenge to get somebody, and they're understandably proud of that guitar. They put a lot of time and work into that, and so you don't want to go, ha, who taught you to do this? But to try to get them to come up to the next level on their craftsmanship, that can be a delicate and gentle process.
Yeah, that's a great way of describing it, Greg. I think honesty is the most respectful way of doing it, and otherwise they wouldn't be asking you your opinion, right? So,
right.
And I think that's fair. One of the things that you mentioned just a couple minutes ago, I want to come back to and revisit. You said something that I haven't heard before, but I want to peel the onion. You said people that might have been taught by or read or acquired the information through different sources, and they don't necessarily match well. Is
right.
there? Can you give me an example of a build approach that is not connecting in that flawless manner like you were talking about?
Well, one of the biggest areas that I see is the neck joint and the neck angle. And the way I was taught to do it is that you set the neck angle so that when the neck is adjusted straight, you put a straight edge on top of the frets, it should hit just above the bridge, right at or just above the bridge. And then
Not
there's
the saddle.
What's that?
Not
the saddle,
yeah.
Top of the bridge, right? Then the saddle raises it up to set your action. Right. Yeah. But there are a lot of people that have been taught to set the neck angle for a certain string height above the top at the bridge. And they don't always, those don't always match. They're close, but, and then, building a guitar with the neck glued on compared to setting the neck after you apply the finish. Those are two major different approaches. My good friend, Robbie O'Brien, who teaches a build class, I believe for the most part, they do a glued on neck, and they actually carve the neck after it's been glued on to the guitar's body, which works for Robbie. I mean, he apprenticed in Brazil from, some masters, and I'm in no way criticizing his methods, but to carve a neck while it's glued to the body of a guitar just scrambles my brain. It just seems like would make it so much more difficult to do the heel, and sanding and everything. So for someone that's been taught to build a guitar with the neck already glued on, that short circuits, or maybe that's the wrong word, that sounds negative, that will mess up 3 or 4 of my processes down the road that I can't do the same.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Okay.
That's kind of an example of where some methods just don't mesh well.
Yeah, no, that's a great example. I'm chuckling here because I'm just thinking about if I'm trying to carve the heel after it's glued on, I'm probably rasping right through the body at some point.
Right. And but it works for him and it works for his students.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great example. No, thanks for that. And then you do a wonderful job, Greg, on your website of sharing information. And one of the things that I love probably more than anything in this craft is the open source and sharing. I've learned the hard way not to do it like this, or I've learned, by talking to masters that this is an easier way of accomplishing greatness. So compliments to you and all the information that you're sharing. And I was really intrigued by some of the conversation that you got into in terms of how we communicate what is a good sounding guitar, especially when you introduce things like subjectivity and what people are looking for, or what they think they're looking for. Getting all of the aspects, the clarity, the balance, the richness, response, sustain. Is there an aspect of the build that contributes more to the idea of overbuilding?
Yeah, that's kind of a difficult question to answer, but if I had to pin it down on one thing, I would say, and this is controversial, and there are going to be people that are disagree. Okay. And that's fine. They may be right and I may be wrong, but an over-fixation on bracing and tone wood species as opposed to focusing in on the material properties at the top.
Okay.
Now that's not necessarily targeting your question about overbuilding. But I think I think we as luthiers and just as human beings, we tend to do the same things over and over and over. My old theater instructor from high school, who was a driven man and a perfectionist, and really was one of the people that had the biggest influence on me as a young, high school kid, to strive always for excellence in what I did. He used to shout at us during rehearsals when we'd botch a line, make a mistake. Practice doesn't make perfect, it makes permanent. Meaning, if you just practice the same thing over and over again, but do it wrong, you're not gaining anything. And, I think we tend to brace guitars over and over and over the same way that, we've seen luthiers before us do it. And it's been, the X-brace, Martin, clear back to, pre-war. And so I think we tend to use that as the gold standard, and maybe that's a little bit heavier than it needs to be. Maybe not the pre-war Martins, but some of the later Martins are built a little heavier. And I think we're afraid. I mean, I remember when I strung out my first steel string guitar in school, and we all joked about it in class. We were all expecting the guitars to explode, when we strung them up, because, just, even if you don't know the math, I mean, I think there's like 170 pounds of tension on a set of light bronze strings. Even if you don't know the numbers, you just know there's a lot of tension and pressure on this very light little wood box I built, and you're expecting it to implode. And I think that fear causes us to always want to err on the side of overbuilding and overbracing and too heavy. And it's really amazing how light you can build a guitar. I remember a quote from John Grevin from a seminar he gave a number of years ago. He said, build a guitar like you're building a model wooden airplane. Make it so that it can fly. And I think that's an interesting concept.
Yeah, that's a very interesting concept, and I love that quote.
I don't know if I answered your question very well, but
no,
I think too many people focus on brace patterns and wood species and not nearly enough attention on the material properties at the top.
Well, I think it's a very I think honest and fair observation, Greg. I'm trying to transition to the next question because your answers are getting my mind going, and my 27-minute interview here is going to turn into an hour. But the individual that I was honored to learn this craft through many, many years ago didn't have access to the science, the computers, but everything that you're describing was still replicated. And I imagine to some degree, probably back the way the old violin, masters did their work. And he had for lack of a better word, it was a homemade little dulcimer. It was a single string, and he could change the pitch of that string and pluck it. And that's what he was targeting with. So basically target resonance frequencies, but he was using his ears.
Right.
And I guess where I want to take the conversation is, not everybody might have access to this high technology. And understanding, I turn around and grab a piece of spruce or redwood and pick it up and tap it and listen to it. And I know what the frequency is I'm aiming towards, but I don't know the properties of the wood.
Well, first, I want to clarify and say that the math throws a lot of potential builders away from even pursuing the data-driven approach. And the spreadsheets that are available do all the math for you. I am not a math person. I've learned how to do the math I need to know in order to build guitars. I've learned to divide 1/8 of an inch in half, and that kind of stuff. But I'm not a good math person. But I use a spreadsheet, and I do the measurements on the plate, enter them into the spreadsheet, and it calculates all the stuff I need to know. So greater minds than I have provided spreadsheets, and there are a number of them out there, available. I know Trevor Gore has a number of them available in his books and online. There's a guy in California named Brian Burns who does this type of stuff and corresponds with people and makes his spreadsheets available. So you don't have to learn or know a lot of math. All you really need is a computer and a microphone and some software that will measure the resonances, and there's a visual analyzer that has a free version you can download. So it takes some effort and some work to get it set up and learn how to use it, but it's not overwhelming. So I would just throw that out there. But if somebody doesn't really want to go to any of that, it doesn't appeal to them, then I would say maybe study under one of the people that uses the more tactile approach to voicing and tuning. Robbie O'Brien would be the first person that would come to my mind. He's voiced hundreds and hundreds of guitars using the tactile approach. He hosts Trevor Gore every year for a master modal tuning class, but Robbie actually doesn't use most of the stuff from the class in his own voicing method, which I find, both amusing and encouraging. I'm encouraged that Robbie will host a teacher that uses a different method, than what he does. I think that's a great attitude. But I would just say find some way of being purposeful about it. Don't just guess, because it takes a lot of years and hundreds of guitars to hone the process by just using your ears. And some of the great old masters, they had to do it that way because they didn't have the tools. When I was a furniture maker, there's a famous early American furniture maker named Duncan Phyfe, and they always argued in the trade journals, well, would Duncan Phyfe have used a router? No, he would have used a hand plane. I'm like, he'd have used a router in a minute if he'd have had it. It's just a tool to accomplish what we need to accomplish. And so my building is a combination of power tools and hand tools, and I use whatever tool I find works best for me for each individual operation.
Yeah. That's another very nice way of breaking it down, thinking about this, the properties and your ultimate goal in terms of resonance frequencies as a method, and you use the tools that you have available to you. It sparked a thought in my head about if in your mind we're aiming in a particular target for a frequency, a combination of the properties of the top could take into consideration, and then how it's braced, how strong the brace is, how thick the brace is, how the shape of the brace is, ultimately get you in combination to your target, correct?
Right.
So if you didn't have the audio analyzer or the technology to put the input in, but you underbraced it, or that's not the right way of saying it, thinned the bracing out and the top was left thick. I guess where I'm going is, at the end of the day, does it really make a difference as long as you're landing at the target resonant frequency? I don't know.
It does, because you can set the top resonance on a guitar with a light top or a heavy top to the same resonance, but the lighter top is going to be a lot more responsive, and you're going to get a much better treble response out of it, because mass or weight is what damps the treble end of the response, and stiffness is what damps the bass response. So you get the best trebles out of a light piece of wood. So density is not your friend when it comes to choosing tops for acoustic guitars, unless you are intentionally building a guitar that you want to have a lot of headroom. You really want to be able to pound a pick into it and have it not lose definition. And that's definitely an approach that has validity to it for certain players, bluegrass players that tend to play. They want really loud instruments, and they drive them really hard. But yeah, I start with a narrow range of material properties for my tops, and I won't build with a top that doesn't fall within that fairly narrow range of stiffness and mass. And my braces all start off the same height and width. And from guitar to guitar to guitar, I end up almost always like nearly identical with where the height of my braces end up after I'm done carving. And some people say that's boring. I've had people tell me, well, it should be like Christmas when you string a guitar for the first time. You never quite know what it's going to sound like. And if that's your approach, that's a legitimate approach, but that doesn't work very well when you have a customer come to your shop and say, I want you to build me a guitar that sounds exactly like this one that you made. Well, you have to know how to get this one to sound like that one if you're going to do that. You can't just go, well, give me your $5,000, but it's going to be like Christmas. You're not really going to know what you're going to get. So I think consistency from build to build is one of the hallmarks of a great builder. You don't have to make them consistent if you don't want to, but you should know how to do it if you need to.
I'm going to steal that line, Greg. It's going to be like Christmas. Or a box of chocolates.
Yeah, there you go. That's Valentine's Day today.
So last question for you is, you meet a young person, you're at the diner having breakfast, and they say, Greg, I'm thinking about building guitar, but I'm intimidated. What do you say to them?
Take my build class. And I'm not being facetious. No, seriously, I would say if you're really serious about learning to build a guitar and you have, the financial ability to do it, most build classes are not inexpensive. Take a class from somebody, who, again, their personality meshes with yours. You can learn easily from them. You enjoy being around them and you enjoy their guitars, and take the class. I get a lot of people that buy kits and they get halfway through the kit and they call me and say, I just can't make this work. Would you be willing to complete the guitar for me? Or would you be willing to, if I pay you, to supervise me to finish it? And people don't realize when they get a kit guitar, it takes almost as many tools to build the kit guitar as it does to build a guitar from scratch, to really do it well, because there's just so many jigs and tools involved in guitar building. And when you become really proficient, you can learn to do certain things with less tools, but not when you're a beginner. You need that tool to do the right job when you're a beginner to get it to come out right. So I try to steer beginners away from do-it-yourself and kits and toward studying with someone. The next best thing is maybe buy a cheap guitar from Craigslist or eBay and just learn to work on it, because a lot of the things that you do in repair and restoration are the same processes that you undertake when you build. Refret it, reglue the bridge, carve the braces a little bit through the sound hole, and learn to measure the resonances and build a nut and a saddle for it. And when you learn to do all those things on a practice guitar, and when you go to do your first one, you're not going to be standing there at your bench with a pile of materials going, oh my gosh, what do I do?
Well, there's some familiarity then of all of those processes, and you're not coming at it cold turkey. But those are great pieces of advice I share. So thank you very much for that, Greg. I enjoyed the conversation. I hope you did.
I did.
I want to thank you very much for your observations, taking us on the journey. I will be looking forward to the pearl inlay snake motif guitar. And thanks so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
All right, Greg, have a great night.
You too.
To learn more about Greg Maxwell, his personal building lessons, custom builds, or Greg's various YouTube videos, visit dogwoodguitars.com. You can see all the links to Greg's social pages on this page right below the video. Thank you for joining us on this episode of Builder Spotlight. Be sure to sign up at acoustic.coffee, and we'll send you a notice when the next episode's ready. Until then, happy brewing, happy building, happy strumming.